The Disappearance of Mr Davenheim by Agatha Christie. Introduction. Poirot bets Japp he can solve the mysterious disappearance of a banker who nipped out to post some letters without even leaving his own apartment.
Poirot and I were expecting our old friend Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard to tea. We were sitting round the tea table waiting for him. Poirot had just finished arranging the cups and saucers, which our landlady was in the habit of throwing rather than placing on the table. He had also breathed heavily on the metal teapot and polished it with a silk handkerchief. The kettle was on the boil, and a small enamel saucepan beside it contained some thick, sweet chocolate, which was more to Poirot's taste than what he called your English poison. A loud knock came from below, and a few minutes afterwards Japp entered briskly.
"Hope I'm not late,"
he said as he greeted us.
"To tell the truth, I was chatting to Miller, the man who's in charge of the Davenheim case."
That caught my attention. For the last 3 days the papers had been full of the strange disappearance of Mr Davenheim, senior partner of Davenheim and Salmon, the well-known bankers. He had walked out of his house last Saturday and hadn't been seen since. I looked forward to hearing some details from Japp. "I should have thought," I said, "that it would be almost impossible for anyone to disappear nowadays." Poirot moved a plate of bread and butter 1/8 of an inch and said sharply,
"Be exact, my friend. What do you mean by disappear? Which class of disappearance are you thinking of?"
"Are disappearances classified and labelled then?" I laughed. Japp smiled also. Poirot frowned at both of us.
"But certainly they are. They fall into 3 categories. First, and most common, the voluntary disappearance. Second, the much abused loss of memory case, rare, but occasionally genuine. Third, murder, and a more or less successful disposal of the body. Do think all 3 are impossible nowadays?"
"Very nearly so, I should think. You might lose your own memory, but someone would be sure to recognize you, especially a well-known man like Davenheim. Then bodies can't be made to vanish into thin air. Sooner or later they tune up, concealed in lonely places or in trunks. Murder will be found out. In the same way a runaway clerk or husband or wife is bound to be found in these days of radio and telephones. They can be headed off from foreign countries, ports and railway stations are watched. And as for hiding in this country, their features and appearance will be known to everyone who reads a daily newspaper. Such people are up against civilization."
"My friend,"
said Poirot,
"you make one error. You do not allow for the fact that a man who has decided to hide another man, or himself, might be that rare item, a man of method. He might bring intelligence, talent, and a careful calculation of detail to the task. And then I do not see why he should not be able to baffle the police force."
"But not you, I suppose?"
said Japp good-humouredly, winking at me.
"He couldn't baffle you, Monsieur Poirot?"
Poirot tried and failed to look modest.
"Me also. Why not? It is true that I approach such problems with an exact science, a mathematical precision, which seems, alas, only too rare in the new generation of detectives."
Japp grinned more widely.
"I don't know,
he said.
Miller, the man who's on this case, is a smart chap. You may be very sure he won't overlook a footprint or cigar ash, or a crumb even. He's hot eyes that see everything."
"So my friend,"
said Poirot,
"has the London sparrow. But all the same, I should not ask the little brown bird to solve the problem of Mr Davenheim."
"Come now, monsieur. You're not going to run down the value of details as clues."
"By no means. These things are all good in their way. The danger is they may be seen as too important. Most details are of no interest. 1 or 2 are vital. It is the brain, the little grey cells," he tapped his forehead, "on which one must rely. The senses mislead. One must seek the truth within, not without."
"You don't mean, Monsieur Poirot, that you would try to solve a case without moving from your chair, do you?"
"That is exactly what I do mean, as long as the facts were placed before me."
Japp slapped his knee.
"All right then, let's see if you can do it. I bet you a £5 that you can't find, or rather tell me where to find, me Davenheim, dead or alive, before a week is out."
Poirot considered.
All right, my friend, I accept. Games are a passion of you English. Now, the facts.
Last Saturday, as usual.
Japp began.
Mr. Davenheim took the 12:40 train from Victoria to Chingside, where he has a country house which is more like a palace called the Cedars. After lunch, he strolled round the grounds and spoke to the gardeners. Everybody agrees that his manner was absolutely normal and as usual. After tea, he put his head into his wife's room, saying that he was going to stroll down to the village and post some letters. He added that he was expecting a Mr. Lowen on business. If he should come before he himself returned, he was to be shown into the study and asked to wait. Mr. Davenheim then left the house by the front door, passed leisurely down the drive and out at the gate, and was never seen again. From that hour, he vanished completely.
Pretty. Very pretty. Altogether, a charming little problem,
murmured Poirot.
Proceed, my good friend.
About a quarter of an hour later, a tall, dark man with a thick black moustache rang the front doorbell at the Cedars and explained that he had an appointment with Mr. Davenheim. He gave the name of Lowen, and as the banker has instructed was shown into the study. Nearly an hour passed. Mr. Davenheim did not return. Finally, Mr. Lowen rang the bell and explained that he was unable to wait any longer, as he must catch his train back to town. Mrs. Davenheim apologised for her husband's absence, which she couldn't explain, as she knew that he had been expecting the visitor. Mr. Lowen said again that he was sorry and left. Well, as everyone knows, Mr. Davenheim did not return. Early on Sunday morning, the police were called, but could make no sense of the matter. Mr. Davenheim seemed to have vanished into thin air. He had not been to the post office, nor had he been seen passing through the village. At the station they were certain he had not departed by any train. His own car had not left the garage. If he had hired a car to meet him in some lonely spot, it seems almost certain that by now, in view of the large reward offered for information, the driver of it would have come forward to tell what he knew. True, there was a small race meeting at Entfield 5 miles away, and if he had walked to that station he might have passed unnoticed in the crowd. But since then, his photograph and a full description of him have been circulated in every newspaper, and nobody has been able to give any news of him. We have, of course, received many letters from all over England, but each clue so far has led nowhere. On Monday morning, a further sensational discovery has made. Behind a heavy curtain in Mr. Davenheim's study stands a safe, and that safe had been broken into and looted. The windows were fastened securely on the inside, which seems to rule out an ordinary burglary, unless, of course, an accomplice within the house fastened them again afterwards. On the other hand, on Sunday, the household was in a state of chaos, so it is likely that the burglary was committed on the Saturday and remained undetected until Monday.
Precisely,
said Poirot dryly.
Well, is he arrested, this poor Mr. Lowen?
Japp grinned.
Not yet, but he's under pretty close supervision.
Poirot nodded.
What was taken from the safe? Have you any idea?
We've been going into that with the junior partner of the firm and Mrs. Davenheim. Apparently there was a large amount of money in bonds and a very large sum in notes, owing to some large transaction having been just carried through. There was also a small fortune in jewellery. All Mrs. Davenheim's jewels were kept in the safe. Buying jewellery had become a passion with her husband in recent years, and hardly a month passed when he did not make her a present of some rare and costly gem.
Altogether, a good haul,
said Poirot thoughtfully.
Now, what about Lowen? Is it known what his business was with Davenheim that evening?
Well, the two men were apparently not on very good terms. Lowen invests in stocks and shares in quite a small way, but he has been able once or twice to score a coup off Davenheim in the market, though it seems they seldom or never actually met. It was a matter concerning some South American shares which led the banker to make the appointment.
Had Davenheim interest in South America then?
I believe so. Mrs. Davenheim mentioned that he spent all last autumn in Buenos Aires.
Any trouble in his home life? Were the husband and wife on good terms?
I should say his domestic life was quite peaceful and uneventful. Mrs. Davenheim is a pleasant, not very bright woman. A bit of a nobody, I think.
Then we must not look for the solution of the mystery there. Had he any enemies?
He had plenty of financial rivals, and no doubt there are many people whom he has got the better of, who don't like him much. But there was no one likely to kill him. And if they had, where is the body?
Exactly. As Hastings says, bodies have a habit of coming to light.
By the way, one of the gardeners says he saw someone going round to the side of the house towards the rose garden. The long French window of the study opens onto the rose garden, and Mr Davenheim frequently entered and left the house that way, but the man was a good way off, at work on some cucumber frames, and cannot even say whether it was Mr Davenheim or not. Also, he cannot fix the time with any accuracy. It must have been before 6, as the gardeners stopped work then.
And Mr Davenheim left the house?
About 5:30.
What lies beyond the rose garden?
A lake.
With a boathouse?
Yes, a couple of punts are kept there. I suppose you're thinking of suicide, Monsieur Poirot. Well, I don't mind telling you that Miller's going down tomorrow expressly to see that piece of water dragged. That's the kind of man he is.
Poirot smiled faintly and turned to me.
Hastings, please hand me that copy of Daily Megaphone. If I remember rightly, there is an unusually clear photograph there of the missing man.
I rose and found the paper. Poirot studied the features attentively. He murmured.
Wears his hair rather long and wavy, full moustache and pointed beard, bushy eyebrows, eyes dark.
Yes.
Hair and beard turning grey?
The detective nodded.
Well, Monsieur Poirot, what have you got to say to it all? Clear as daylight, eh?
On the contrary, most obscure.
The Scotland Yard man looked pleased.
Which gives me great hopes of solving it,
said Poirot quietly.
Eh?
I find it a good sign when a case is obscure. If a thing is clear as daylight, well, mistrust it. Someone has made it so.
Japp shook his head almost with pity.
Well, each to his own, but it's not a bad thing to see your way clear ahead.
I do not see,
murmured Poirot.
I shut my eyes and think.
Japp signed.
Well, you've got a clear week to think in.
And you will bring me any fresh facts that arise. The result of the labours of the hard-working and lynx-eyed Inspector Miller, for instance.
Certainly. That's in the bargain. Seems a shame, doesn't it?
Said Japp to me as I went with him to the door.
Like robbing a child?
I could not help agreeing with a smile. I was still smiling as I came back into the room.
Well,
said Poirot immediately.
You make fun of Papa Poirot, is it not so?
He shoot his finger at me.
You do not trust his grey cells? Ah, do not be confused. Let us discuss this little problem. Incomplete as yet, I admit, but already showing 1 or 2 points of interest.
The lake, I said firmly. And even more than the lake, the boathouse. I looked sideways at Poirot. He was smiling in his most inscrutable fashion. I felt that for the moment it would be quite useless to question him further. We heard nothing of Japp until the following evening, when he walked in about 9 o'clock. I saw at once by his expression that he was bursting with news of some kind.
Well, my friend,
remarked Poirot,
all goes well. But do not tell me that you have discovered the body of Mr. Davenheim in your lake, because I shall not believe you.
We haven't found the body, but we did find his clothes, the identical clothes he was wearing that day. What do you say to that?
Any other clothes missing from the house?
No, his valet was quite positive on that point. The rest of his clothes are where they should be. There's more. We've arrested Lowen. One of the maids, whose job is to fasten the bedroom window, declares that she saw Lowen coming towards the study through the rose garden about 6:15. That would be about 10 minutes before he left the house.
What does he himself say to that?
Denied first of all that he had ever left the study, but the maid was positive, and then he pretended that he had forgotten just stepping out of the window to examine an unusual species of rose. Rather a weak story. And there's fresh evidence against him. Mr. Davenheim always wore a thick gold ring set with a solitaire diamond on the little finger of his right hand. Well, that ring was pawned in London on Saturday night by a man called Billy Kellett. Kellett is already known to the police, did 3 months last autumn for lifting an old gentleman's watch. It seems he tried to pawn the ring at no less than 5 different places, succeeded at the last one, got very drunk on the proceeds, assaulted a policeman and was arrested. I went to Bow Street with Miller and saw him. He's sober enough now, and I don't mind admitting we pretty well frightened the life out of him, hinting he might be charged with murder. This is his story, and a very queer one it is. He was at Entfield raced on Saturday. Through, I dare say, stealing scarf pins was his line of business, rather than betting. Anyway, he had a bad day and was down on his luck. He was tramping along the road to Chingside and sat down in a ditch to rest just before he got into the village. A few minutes after he noticed a man coming along the road to the village, a dark-complexioned Gent with a big moustache, one of them city toffs, is his description of the man. Kellett was half concealed from the road by a heap of stones. Just before he got abreast of him, the man looked quickly up and down the road, and seeing it apparently deserted, he took a small object from his pocket and threw it over the hedge. Then he went on towards the station. Now, the object he had thrown over the hedge had fallen with a slight chink, which attracted Kellett as he sat in the ditch. He went to look and, after a short search, found the ring. That is Kellett's story. It's only fair to say that Lowen denies it utterly, and of course the word of a man like Kellett can't be relied upon in the slightest. It's within the bounds of possibility that he met Davenheim in the lane and robbed and murdered him.
Poirot shook his head.
Very unlikely, my friend. He had no means of disposing of the body. It would have been found by now. Secondly, the open way in which he pawned the ring makes it unlikely that he did murder to get it. Thirdly, your sneak thief is rarely a murderer. Fourthly, as he has been in prison since Saturday, it would be too much of a coincidence that he is able to give so accurate a description of Lowen.
Japp nodded.
I don't say you're not right, but all the same you won't get a jury to take much note of a jailbird's evidence. What seems odd to me is that Lowen couldn't find a cleverer way of disposing of the ring.
Poirot shrugged his shoulders.
Well, after all, if it were found in the neighbourhood, it might be argued that Davenheim himself hand-dropped it.
But why remove it from the body at all? I cried.
There might be a reason for that,
said Japp.
Do you know that just beyond the lake, a little gate leads out onto the hill and not 3 minutes' walk brings you to, what do you think, a lime kiln?
Good heavens, I cried. You mean that the lime which destroyed the body would be powerless to affect the metal of the ring?
Exactly.
It seems to me, I said. That explains everything. What a horrible crime. By common consent, we both turned and looked at Poirot. He seemed lost in reflection. His forehead creased as though with some supreme mental effort. I felt at last his keen intellect was coming to life. What would his first words be? We were not long left in doubt. With a sigh, the tension of his attitude relaxed, and turning to Japp, he asked,
Have you any idea, my friend, whether Mr. and Mrs. Davenheim occupied the same bedroom?
The question seemed so ludicrously odd that for a moment we both stared in silence. Then Japp burst into a laugh.
Ha ha, good Lord, Monsieur Poirot. I thought you were coming out with something startling. As to your question, I'm sure I don't know.
You could find out?
Asked Poirot with curious persistence.
Oh, certainly. If you really want to know.
Thank you, my friend. I should be obliged if you would make a point of it.
Japp stared at him a few minutes longer, but Poirot seemed to have forgotten us both. The Scotland Yard detective shook his head sadly at me and murmuring,
Poor old fellow. War's been too much for him.
Gently withdrew from the room. As Poirot seemed sunk in a daydream, I took a sheet of paper and amused myself by scribbling notes upon it. My friend's voice aroused me. He had come out of his dream and was looking brisk and alert.
What are you doing, my friend?
I was jotting down what occurred to me as the main points of interest in this affair.
You become methodical, at last,
said Poirot happily. I hid my pleasure. Shall I read them to you?
By all means.
I cleared my throat. 1. All the evidence points to Lowen having been the man who forced the safe. 2. He had a grudge against Davenheim. 3. He lied in his first statement that he had never left the study. 4. If you accept Billy Kellett's story as true, Lowen is unmistakably implicated. I paused. Well? I asked, for I felt that I had put my finger on all the vital facts. Poirot looked at me with pity, shaking his head very gently.
My poor friend, you have not the gift. The important detail, you don't see it ever. Also, your reasoning is false.
How?
Let me take your 4 points. 1. Mr. Lowen could not possibly know that he would have the chance to open the safe. He came for a business interview. He could not know beforehand that Mr. Davenheim would be absent posting a letter, and that he would therefore be alone in the study.
He might have seized the opportunity, I suggested.
And the tools? City gentlemen do not carry round housebreakers' tools on the off chance, and one could cut into that safe with a penknife, of course.
Well, what about number 2?
You say Lowen had a grudge against Mr. Davenheim. What you mean is that he had once or twice got the better of him, and we presume that those deals were to his benefit. In any case, you do not, as a rule, bear a grudge against a man you have got the better of. It is more likely to be the other way about. Whatever grudge there might have been would have been on Mr. Davenheim's side.
Well, you can't deny that he lied about never having left the study?
No, but he may have been frightened. Remember, when Lowen was questioned, the missing man's clothes had just been discovered in the lake. Of course, as usual, he would have done better to speak the truth.
And the 4th point?
I grant you that. If Kellett's story is true, Lowen is undeniably implicated. That is what makes the affair so very interesting.
Then I did appreciate one vital fact.
Perhaps. But you have entirely overlooked the 2 most important points, the ones which undoubtedly hold the clue to the whole matter.
Any pray, what are they?
1. The passion which has grown upon Mr. Davenheim in the last few years for buying jewellery. 2. His trip to Buenos Aires last autumn.
Poirot, you are joking?
I am serious. Ah, scared thunder. I hope Japp will not forget my little question.
But the detective, entering into the spirit of the joke, had remembered it so well that a telegram was handed to Poirot about 11 o'clock the next day. At his request, I opened it and read it out. Husband and wife have occupied separate rooms since last winter.
Aha!
Cried Poirot.
And now we are in mid-June. All is solved.
I stared at him.
You have no money in the bank of Davenheim and Salmon, my friend.
No, I said, wondering. Why?
Because I should advise you to withdraw it, before it is too late.
Why, what do you expect?
I expect a big smash in a few days, perhaps sooner, which reminds me we will return the compliment of telegram to Japp. A pencil, please, and a form. There. Advise you to withdraw any money deposited with firm in question. That will intrigue him, the good Japp. His eyes will open wide. Wide. He will not understand this at all, until tomorrow or the next day.
I was not sure, but the next morning I was forced to wonder at my friend's remarkable powers. In every paper was a huge headline telling of the sensational failure of the Davenheim Bank. The disappearance of the famous banker appeared totally different in the light of this news. Before we were halfway through breakfast, the door flew open and Japp rushed in. In this left hand was a paper. In his right was Poirot's telegram, which he banged down on the table in front of my friend.
How did you know, Monsieur Poirot? How the blazed could you know?
Poirot smiled at him calmly.
Ah, my friend, after you telegram it was a certainty. From the start, you see, it struck me that the safe burglary was somewhat remarkable. Jewels, ready money, bonds, all so conveniently arranged for whom? Well, the good Monsieur Davenheim was one of those who look after number 1, as your saying goes. It seemed almost certain that it was arranged for himself. Then, his passion of late years for buying jewellery. How simple. The funds he stole, he turned into jewels, very likely replacing them in turn with paste copies. So he put away in a safe place, under another name, a large fortune to be enjoyed in the future when everyone has been thrown off the track. His plans complete, he makes an appointment with Mr. Lowen, who has been foolish enough in the past to cross the great man once or twice, drills a hole in the sage, leaves orders that the guest is to be shown into the study, and walks out of the house. Where?
Poirot stopped and stretched out his hand for another boiled egg. He frowned.
It is really dreadful,
he murmured,
that every hen lays an egg of a different size. What symmetry can there be on the breakfast table? At least they should sort them in dozens at the shop.
Never mind the eggs,
said Japp impatiently.
Let 'em lay 'em square if they like. Tell us where the man went to when he left the Cedars, that is, if you know.
All right, he went to his hiding place. This Monsieur Davenheim, there may be something wrong with his grey cells, but they are of the first quality.
Do you know where he is hiding?
Certainly, it is most ingenious.
For the Lord's sake, tell us then.
Poirot gently collected every fragment of shell from his plate, placed them in the egg cup, and put the empty eggshell upside down on top of them. This little job done, he smiled at the neat effect, and then beamed fondly at us both.
Come, my friends. You are men of intelligence. Ask yourself the question I ask myself. If I were this man, where should I hide? Hastings, what do you say?
Well, I said, I think I'd not do a bolt at all. I'd stay in London, in the heart of things, travel by tubes and buses. 10 to 1 I'd never be recognized. There's safety in a crowd. Poirot turned to Japp.
I don't agree.
Japp said.
Get clear away at once, that's the only chance. I would have had plenty of time to prepare things. I'd have a yacht waiting with steam up, and I'd be off to one of the most out-of-the-way corners of the world before anyone came looking for me.
We both looked at Poirot.
What do you say, monsieur?
For a moment he remained silent. Then a very curious smile flitted across his face.
My friends, if I were hiding from the police, do you know where I should hide? In a prison.
What?
You are seeking Monsieur Davenheim in order to put him in prison, so you never dream of looking to see if he may not be already there.
What do you mean?
You tell me Mrs. Davenheim is not a very intelligent woman, but I think if you took her up to Bow Street and showed her the man Billy Kellett, she would recognize him, in spite of the fact that he has shaved his beard and moustache and those bushy eyebrows and has cropped his hair close. A woman nearly always knows her husband, though the rest of the world may be fooled.
Billy Kellett? But he's known to the police.
Did I not tell you Davenheim was a clever man? He prepared his disappearance long beforehand. He was not in Buenos Aires last autumn. He was creating the character of Billy Kellett, doing 3 months, so that the police should have no doubts when the time came. He was playing, remember, for a large fortune as well as liberty. It was worthwhile doing the thing thoroughly. Only...
Yes?
Well, after his 3 months in prison, he had to wear a false beard and wig, had to make up as himself again, and to sleep with a false beard is not easy. It is easily detected. He cannot risk continuing to share the bedroom with his wife. You found out for me that for the last 6 months, or ever since his supposed return from Buenos Aires, he and Mrs. Davenheim occupied separate rooms. Then I was true. Everything fitted in. The gardener who fancied he saw Mr. Davenheim going round to the side of the house was quite right. He went to the boathouse, put on his tramp clothes, which you may be sure had been safely hidden from the eyes of his valet, and dropped the others in the lake. He proceeded to carry out his plan by pawning the ring in an obvious manner, and then by assaulting a policeman, getting himself safely into the haven of Bow Street, where nobody would ever dream of looking for him.
It's impossible,
murmured Japp.
Ask Mrs. Davenheim,
said my friend, smiling. The next day a letter lay beside Poirot's plate. He opened it, and a £5 note fluttered out. My friend frowned.
My God! But what shall I do with it? I have much remorse. Poor Japp. An idea. We will have a little dinner, we 3. That makes me feel better. It was really too easy. I am ashamed. I, who would not rob a child. 1,000 curses. My friend, what are you thinking that you laugh so heartily?
The End. The Disappearance of Mr Davenheim by Agatha Christie. Voices generated by 11labs.io. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe our channel Read Up Your Life.